Oh, here.
So we're waiting for the mayor to join us.
Krista, we can't see you. How are you?
I'm doing well, Delji. Thank you. So we're live streaming on YouTube now, everyone. So we'll just give it a couple minutes just to get, the mayor is going to call in and then
Krista? Are you there, Krista? You seem muted.
sorry, I had to mute myself. There was just feedback.
Okay, I just noticed there were two hands raised.
Yeah, so the only people who should be raising hands should be participants in the meeting, which would be the committee members. So we're not
Right.
taking questions. Like a typical meeting, we don't take questions.
So I guess I can tell those who have their hands up that, as you may have just heard, we're not going to be taking questions. So I'm not sure if that helps or if it's an accidental pair of hands I see raised on the screen.
Yeah, if there are media requests, those should be followed up with after the meeting.
Okay.
Okay, so I do have a call in here. So I believe.
Hello.
Oh, there we have the mayor on. So I'll just bring up the agenda.
Hi.
Hello, Mayor.
Hi. How's everyone?
Everybody is well. We're just waiting for the agenda to come up, and while we're waiting, I'll just make a comment. We are at the mercy of a remote connection. So there may be times we may possibly lose a connection during the course of the meeting. If that happens, we'll just hold on until it gets reestablished. But we don't have particularly robust connections all around. So there may be some issues in terms of being able to have a smooth flow for this. So I'm going to start the meeting now and welcome everybody to the Finance and Audit Committee meeting, Agenda 8, the 21st of April, Tuesday, 21st of April, 2020 at 1 p.m. And as mentioned, we're doing this via Zoom video conferencing, so there may be some issues. I'll also note that the mayor, who you heard, has joined us, although his image will not be available. He is called in, so he is present as well, although not visible on the screen. So I'll get started with a presentation. The first item on the agenda is a presentation, and I believe, Jeff, you'll be sharing your screen to start that presentation for us. Oh, so before we do that, I better just confirm do a confirmation of the agenda, that the Finance and Audit Committee confirmed the agenda number 21 of the April 2020 meeting. Is that confirmed?
Confirmed.
Great, thank you very much. I'd like to confirm the minutes, number 7 of the 2nd of December 2019, that the Finance and Audit Committee confirmed the minutes from the 2nd of December 2019 meeting. Are they confirmed?
Confirmed.
Are there any business arising from the minutes?
No.
Okay, then the first item of business is the financial update on COVID-19, a presentation by Jeff, I believe.
Thank you, Sandy. I'm just going to, okay, so Krista, I think you have to stop sharing your screen so that I can share my screen. There we go. Can everybody see that?
Yes.
Okay, excellent. So thank you, folks. So I'm here today to provide you with a financial update related to the pandemic. And it's not moving. There we go. So as you're all aware, we are in unprecedented times. The pandemic has caused an unbelievable amount of change in a very short time frame. We wanted to start by sharing the fact that we do understand the financial responsibilities of the command team with respect to the board. The OPS command is committed to keeping the board updated on any in-year financial changes. The COVID-19 pandemic response does represent a major financial risk for the 2020 OPS budget. Several briefings have been provided to the board on pandemic response so far, and our goal is to develop a more formal structure for financial reporting information to ensure the board has the information that it requires.
Jeff, just before you go on, I'm just checking, can you folks hear me?
Yes, we can.
Great. It's an additional perspective and one that's a bit last minute, but I think it's worthy before we go further. The COVID-19 pandemic does represent a major financial risk to the 2020 operating budget. But it is clearly also an incredible opportunity, not just for the OPS, but for any organization to revisit its core operating model. And depending on how the pandemic continues to unfold locally, globally, how it impacts us, not just financially, but in many other ways, a change to our operating model, a significant one, is a very real potential. And within that very real potential is the potential opportunity to actually affect the operating costs of the organization and the city going forward. I don't think that should be lost. In every crisis, there is both an opportunity and a challenge. And while we're focusing primarily on the challenge, there's clearly an opportunity before us. And I can also assure the board that as late as a phone call at 11:30 today with the entire senior leadership team, we've turned our attention to both the risks and the opportunities, and I'll be happy to expand on that later on. Jeff, back to you.
Thank you, Chief. So I'll carry on. Well, we have been very focused over the last 4 weeks on sound financial management principles and controls. We've been laser focused on forecasting and understanding and managing the impacts to the OPS budget. We are fully aligned with the City of Ottawa Business Continuity Task Force and the financial forecasting process associated with that. The forecast does include high-level assumptions at this time. It will evolve as more time passes and more data becomes available. Forecasting accuracy is a challenge due to the rapidly changing environment. Things are changing almost on a daily basis. The current forecast includes 2 scenarios that we're sharing with you today, mainly based on the length of the pandemic. The first assumes to the end of June, and the second assumes to the end of 2020.
Jeff, again, I'm just going to jump in as you transition to the next page, just for even more specificity on the term length of pandemic. We are in the incident response phase of the pandemic. To some degree, we may still be escalating in that response phase because we're not yet sure from our own local Ottawa Public Health as to whether or not we've peaked out yet on the initial health curve. So there will be after that a period of stabilization, followed potentially by another ramping up period of health impacts. It's not a certainty that there'll be a double camel hump effect, but it is a possibility. Assuming we go through stabilization and potentially a second round of escalation, at some point we'll move from response into recovery. That recovery period is likely going to be in the range of several months to potentially several years. And then after that, there will be a period of the opportunity for us to return backwards to a pre-COVID sense of normalcy, or as I said earlier on, advance forwards into some sort of new normal that will have challenges and opportunities abundant in there. But for the purposes of this presentation, we're talking about primarily talking about the response phase to the pandemic going through to either June or the substantive part of 2020. Jeff, back to you.
Okay, thanks, Chief. So I've moved on to slide 3. Our forecasting and the evaluation of options and interventions has been guided by a key set of principles. The principles are fully aligned with the commander's intent set up through our pandemic response, the incident command team. And those principles are laid out on the slide in front of you. Continuing to provide police operations, protecting the health and safety of our members, maintaining capacity to deliver policing operations, protecting our community and sustainability of our healthcare system, maintaining public confidence, and financial sustainability. So those are the core principles that that we've used as we've evaluated any options, and as we will continue to evaluate options in managing any financial pressures of this situation. I wanted to spend a little bit of time identifying some of the significant financial controls that have already been implemented by the command team. A full incident command system for COVID-19, including a financial management position to track all expenses, facilitate procurement, etc., was set up on March 2nd. A no travel order was implemented on March 10th. A full discretionary spending freeze was implemented on March 13th. A dedicated cost center to track all incremental expenses due to COVID-19 was set up as well. Employee transfers and temporary assignment freeze was implemented on March 17th. Enhanced tracking and reporting of COVID-19 overtime, as well as general overtime, along with enhanced controls, was implemented on March 18th. And the deferral of WSIB admin fees was implemented April 7th. We took advantage of that program that was offered by the WSIB organization. So a significant number of financial controls have already been implemented, and those have been included in our forecast that we're sharing with you today, and that's been shared with the city partners as they go through that forecasting process. Slide 5 highlights the current forecast of the 2020 budget impacts due to COVID-19. And again, as I mentioned previously, we're showing two different scenarios. One where the response period for the COVID-19 pandemic lasts until the end of June, and the second where it lasts until the end of 2020. So those are the two columns you see there with respect to on this slide. In terms of pressures, if the under the first scenario, we're seeing total pressures of 6.5 million, split between revenue pressures, almost evenly between revenue pressures and expense pressures. On the expense savings side, we're seeing a significant, because of the financial controls that have been put in place, we're as you can see, we've been able to implement $5.1 million in expense savings. And that's split mainly between overtime, whether it's court overtime, regular overtime, and fuel in the June period. And then $3.9 million worth of discretionary expense savings due to the spending freeze, travel restrictions, training, and paid duty overtime. So a total of $5.1 million of expense savings are forecasted to the end of June, and that would leave a deficit of 1.4 million to the end of June. The majority, as you can see, if you look at the expense pressure and the expense savings, we're actually showing a surplus there. The deficit is coming from the loss of revenues from paid duties, background checks, as well as the loss of revenue from the airport contract. When we look at the full year impact, the total pressures are close to $17 million. Revenue pressure is 7.4. Expense pressures are 11.4 million. On the expense savings side, we are able to more than offset the expense pressures at 12.9 million. However, that's not enough to offset the revenue pressure, and we're seeing a deficit projection of $5.9 million. So What we wanted to share with you as well are some additional options that are being reviewed and weighed against core principles, risks to implement, as well as the current operating and financial conditions. So we have a list, and these aren't necessarily these are ranked somewhat in order of ease of implementation as I go through these. So I'll walk through them. I won't spend a lot of time in going through each of these in detail, but if there are questions, I'd be happy to answer them. Annual leave is something that we're looking at quite closely, and we're looking at increasing the utilization of annual leave banks to minimize either the cash payouts or the accrual and the impact on the operating expense from the accrual of higher leave banks at the end of the year. Equipment and supplies, we're reviewing all operational equipment and supply practices to understand if there can be additional savings generated. On the capital projects side, we've completed a first review of all of our capital projects, and we believe we can identify savings from deferring some works in progress capital projects, mainly in the facilities and IT areas. We're aggressively looking at managing our vacancies. This would increase our gapping savings by holding select vacancies for a longer period of time. Permanent redeployment. This would be, we already have, from an operational perspective, redeployed a significant amount of staff to ensure that we can manage the front line and manage our staffing on the front line perspective. But as we move down the list of additional options, this is something that we would look at down the line to manage savings. The South facility, it's one of our, it is our biggest project. It's the biggest project in the history of OPS. There are significant unknowns with it, but delaying the South facility would not have any potential, any savings in 2020. However, it would defer future period debt servicing costs. However, delays do bring forward a higher risk of cost escalation. However, there are so many unknowns at this point in terms of how things will, what the market will look like during the recovery period, that it is difficult to forecast. However, that is an option that's on the table. Continuing on, casual and temporary staff layoffs. This would be looking at the temporary reduction in the use of casual and temporary staff. Financial relief. We are working with the city and other levels of government on proposals for grants or other forms of financial relief. All incremental costs of the pandemic are being tracked. So if that does materialize in the future, we are ready to be able to submit proposals to receive financial relief. Collective bargaining is on the list as well. We do need to factor that in. It likely has longer term implications. However, both agreements are up and up for negotiation. So we do need to take this into consideration moving forward with bargaining. The healthy turnout rate. This is a key priority of the organization moving forward. We are continuing to invest in our wellness strategy with the goal of improving the staff turnout rate, reducing our sick time costs, and improving member morale and engagement. And then the accelerated hiring plan is also on the list in terms of a deferral of the plan and the associated cost savings, short-term cost savings that could come with that program. So as I mentioned, we have had several healthy discussions. We will continue to have those healthy discussions on a daily basis. All options are being reviewed. They are being weighed against the core principles that I walked you through earlier, the risk to implement, the current operating and financial conditions, and the financial sustainability of the organization moving forward, along with ensuring adequate and effective policing.
Jeff, again, before you Go on to the next slide. The one thing that's not explicitly there, and we're just turning our minds to, as you recall on the previous slide 5, that revenue loss is actually driving the majority of our projected in-year deficit. We're also going to consider new revenue opportunities. There is a potential that we might be able to homeschool our own recruits. There's a live discussion going on at Solicitor General around the future of the Ontario Police College as the main venue around which recruits are trained and certified in the province. The OACP has put forward a proposal, which I was part of, around which Ottawa could become the Eastern Region Training Center. And there's a revenue stream opportunity for us, whether it's direct from other agencies or through SolGen. There are also a range of other revenue opportunities that other police services have explored in the past, and none that I would go to immediately or want to even replicate, but the unique circumstances would cause us to at least review those options. And they're not limited to things like increasing the level of background checks that we provide, as has some services like Coburg been able to finance significantly both operating and capital budgets. But I don't want to limit ourselves just to what's gone on in the past. There are a range of other opportunities that we could look at. So in addition to cost savings and deferral of operations, we can look at increasing our revenues beyond what we had in 2019 and for the first quarter of 2020.
Thank you, Chief. I'll move on to slide 8 and talk about some of the financial risks and emerging issues. It's important to note that tax revenue impacts have not been included in the forecast that I've just walked you through. Cash flow shortfalls at the city could be significant if passed on to OPS. Budget impact would be material, whether in year 2020 or moving forward into the future. So we are having regular conversations. We're staying in close contact with our partners at the city on this one. Another important risk that I want the board to be aware of: red light camera revenue is a risk. We've been in regular contact with the city CFO. So far, the direction has been to maintain this line item as on budget in our forecast. We've maintained that. There is a $3 million budget number for 2020, so there's a risk there. The tax stabilization funding, same issue as red light camera revenue. It's currently included in our forecast as on budget. Federal and provincial grants, those have also been included in the forecast as on budget. Some other emerging issues that we are dealing with that I just wanted to raise to the Finance and Audit Committee: the family status accommodations. With schools being out, we have seen an increase in family status accommodations. This has been a challenge that the teams, the pandemic team, the staffing team, and the labor relations team have been doing a great job to manage. But our members have been doing an unbelievable job in creatively juggling their home situation to be able to manage their families and manage their work requirements. But it is an issue that we're regularly tracking and monitoring. We were concerned. We had significant concerns a few weeks ago. That risk level is lowering. However, it's something that we're continuing to monitor. And then legal indemnity costs moving forward with the courts closed. This isn't an issue, but as things open back up again, there could be some significant costs down the road. In terms of next steps, OPS continues to deliver effective policing service and adapts to this emergency event on an ongoing basis. We will continue to keep the board informed through the Finance and Audit Committee. We are having regular daily contact with the OPA and the SOA, and regular communication continues and will continue with our city partners. So with that, that concludes the presentation. I don't know if Chief, if you want to have any closing comments, and then I'd be happy to take any questions.
Yep, just some closing comments. Thank you, Jeff. Great job by you and your team and all who contributed to that. Again, I just want to reference something. We took a very early approach to this. The organization was monitoring the events taking place in China from over the holiday period, certainly through January. We had a very, very early start to our ramping up and made some very early significant financial decisions, which have put us into a better position despite the projected deficit. So again, kudos to the command team and those that were charting the horizon for us, identifying issues early. That's a strength of this organization that will continue regardless of what happens during and post COVID-19. In addition to that, the board set itself the task of bringing in a new command, a new chief, a new CAO, and to do that specifically to change the organization. The organizational priorities as set by the board and is continued and implemented through the organization has put us in a position to be more proactive than reactive. Certainly the plan that I laid out for the board in my selection process and in my first board meeting back in November of 2019 laid out what I will call the 6 Ps: people and partnerships, prevention and precision, followed by performance and potential. Every one of those 6 Ps has the ability for us to reduce operating costs while improving operating outcomes. The very nature of the COVID-19 is a health crisis, not a crime crisis. And for once in my 30 years in policing, we have had a clear demonstration that putting people in jail is not the best way to actually promote healthy and safe communities. And if we address underlying issues, of which health is one of those major underlying issues that contribute to crime, then we can have a significant impact on the overall well-being of a city and a society, as well as reducing costs. I hope that one of the things that comes out of COVID-19 will not simply be an exercise in cost cutting, but a change in the operating model of all organizations, and I will commit to that for the Ottawa Police Service. We have new legislation in place under this provincial government, a new Police Services Act, at the heart of which is the requirement for each municipality to have a community safety and well-being plan that is already well underway here in Ottawa, led by Tony DeMonte and supported directly by the OPS. There was a memo that came out from the Solicitor General permitting municipalities and organizations to delay the implementation of community safety and well-being planning. I would strongly recommend quite the opposite. We accelerate it. We accelerate because at its heart, it's a health plan, not a crime plan, and it will help the city to recover from COVID-19. I respectfully submit that as we're talking about the budget impacts of COVID-19, a strong community safety and well-being plan, where all aspects of the municipal government, including the municipal police service of jurisdiction, are contributing directly, will actually reduce the cost of policing in the city and increase other revenues and decrease costs across the board. This is a unique opportunity, as much or more so than it is a unique challenge. And with that, concludes my remarks.
Thank you very much, Chief. As you said, and I would certainly agree with you, excellent job by our CAO, Jeff, and your team. We are in extraordinary times, and this is really calls everybody to turn up with their A game. So one of the things I wanted to add before we go to the other committee members for questions was just, we have a communication from Marie Evelyn, who's the Executive Director of Volunteer Ottawa, regarding the fee for background checks. And given that today is about finding solutions to a growing budget deficit, I'm not sure how we can entertain this request. I'm wondering if maybe Volunteer Ottawa would be able to work with the various partners and partner organizations to review police record check requirements. These are, as I said, extraordinary times, and I think we all have to be prepared to adapt accordingly. So I'm not sure if other committee members want to comment on that, but I thought with the questions for Jeff, that should be one of the things that the committee members are keeping in mind. So I have some questions, but I'll check first to see Mayor or Member Meehan, do you have questions for Jeff?
For now, no, thank you.
I just, it's Carol Ann. I have one question. I just can't remember off the top of my head, Jeff, what our indemnity, like what do we budget for indemnity every year? Generally speaking.
Yeah, I'm just looking that up. It's about $1.5 million is what we budget for legal indemnity.
Okay, and where does it sit right now?
I'd have to get you that.
Okay, that's okay.
We're in decent shape right now.
Okay.
We're in decent shape right now, but again, the courts have been closed.
Yeah,
So if they remain closed, it's not an issue, and we're putting that forward as an emerging item that we're watching. We could see some savings from that in year. However, when the courts do reopen again, and proceedings do start to occur, we could see some pent up demand and some pressure pushed into 2021 or future years.
okay. No, I don't have any other questions, and I'm just looking at my.
Mayor, did
Oh.
you have some questions?
Sure. Thank you very much, Jeff. It's a good presentation. A couple of years ago, when we were dealing with a financial crunch, we put ourselves on a vehicle diet for 1 year through our fleet services operation. Is that something that has been looked at? You know, you keep a car an extra year as opposed to buying a new vehicle. That saved us a couple $1 million.
Yeah.
One-time money.
So, Mr. Mayor, we actually did that in 2017 as one of our deficit reducing initiatives, and we actually did take a 1 year holiday on replacing vehicles, and it did help us that year. However, unfortunately we're paying for that that decision ever since, as we've seen our vehicle maintenance costs increase. And the strategy that we took in the 2020 budget was to catch up and replace those vehicles at a faster rate to lower those maintenance costs. We did have a $600,000 pressure in 2019 from higher vehicle maintenance due to the aging fleet. So we did look at that just recently. That's why it isn't on the table this year. However, we did talk about it. As we said, everything is on the table. But because we did that and executed that just back in 2017, we don't think it's prudent to do that again.
As you know, we went through the painful exercise of having to lay off about 4,200 people. Has the police service laid off anyone as a result of COVID-19?
We have not laid off anyone as a result of COVID-19. No.
Okay. In terms of the new hires, how many are in the system? Where does that stand now of the 100 new hires? How many are at the police college? Is the police college still operating?
The police college is not operating right now. They've closed their doors. The accelerated hiring plan was made up of 100 growth hires and 50 hires to replace retirements and resignations.
Right.
So the plan was based on 3 hiring classes of 48. 48 was the maximum number of seats we could get at the Ontario Police College. The first class of 48 was hired. The offers went out in late February. So they have been hired. And
so they haven't or have been?
They have been hired. The first class of 48 have been
But
hired. The offers
haven't gone through the police college yet. Is that correct?
No, they haven't gone through the police college, but our professional development center team has been working with the police college and is putting together a home schooling option. The chief mentioned it briefly during some of his remarks, but they've developed a homeschooling option, working with our IT department, being able to run the curriculum. The OPC is sharing their curriculum, and so our PDC training staff are working on a plan. That plan is going to be presented to Exec Command later this week, and they'll be able to train and certify those members to get them on the road.
So are those people then, would they be considered on the payroll now?
Yes, they are.
Okay. Yeah, because I think, Chief, my office is trying to set up a meeting with you and Jeff and Wendy and Steve K to look at some other different options, hopefully sometime this week, that we can agree on, because one of the challenges we're facing is there's a lot of assumptions we're all making, including federal and provincial grants, whether it's one-time or base funding increases. We haven't landed on that yet, nor have we landed on the assessment growth number. We assume, I think it's a safe assumption, that the growth number will be down simply because we've stopped issuing building permits for new houses as a result of the provincial regulation. So I look forward to meetings so that we can talk about some of the challenges we're facing, because that has a ripple effect for all our agencies, including OPH and the Ottawa Public Library, as well as the Ottawa Police. Chief, on the example of your last comment with respect to savings and revenue, do you have any other examples that you've seen in other jurisdictions that might help us out?
It's top of mind, Mayor. And so first of all, just relating to the previous comment, yes, I think your staff has set up a call for us on Thursday, and Jeff, myself, Pat Flanagan will be on the call, and we're looking forward to that. Revenue streams, everything here in Canada has mainly been around pay duties, background checks, various contracts with airports. There's a unique opportunity here that we haven't really discussed, and that's the contract we have for policing in the National Capital. There's both a risk and an opportunity there. More broadly, we have seen various agencies. I know in Toronto for a period of time, we generated revenue through the use of the Toronto Police College for providing training that wasn't offered through the Ontario Police College or the Canadian Police College, or was offered there, but it could be delivered in a better way for regional agencies like Peel and York and Durham and Barrie and other places closer to the GTA. So that's an opportunity. And certainly when the UK went through the economic downturn of the mid-2000s, there was a whole wide range of revenue generating opportunities that were explored and implemented, some of which today are still in place. It's been a while since I dusted off that list, so I just don't want to be too loose in my language on this call. But yes, there is a healthy dose of revenue generation in Western policing tradition within the last 10 years that we could refer to, as well as, quite frankly, we're in the fourth industrial revolution. We've gone through a process now with COVID-19 where we have accelerated and actually finally appreciated the power of technology, particularly digital enabled technology. And there may be things that Ottawa Police can do now that could generate a revenue in the short and medium term. Again, we'd have to turn our minds to that, and as always, will be ethical and legal limitations on what we can and should do in any of those areas.
Right. Okay, thank you.
Thanks very much. Jeff, I wondered, in your comments, you'd mentioned about discussions with the associations, and I wondered, one of the issues that we have dealt with over the years is the requirement for a minimum of commitment of 42 patrol cars. And I wondered, I noticed in the agreement that it says that there is a provision in the agreement that says except in extraordinary circumstances, that requirement holds except in extraordinary circumstances. And this certainly, I think, would qualify as an extraordinary circumstance. So I wondered if in terms of your discussions or negotiations, if you have raised this issue.
I may turn this over to Steve and DC Bell and or the chief, because they are having daily conversations with the OPA and the SOA about this. But the extraordinary circumstances discussion has come up several times in various discussions with the OPA. One of the more recent ones was with respect to the planning and then ultimate implementation of the reserve staffing model that the service implemented. We did decide not to go down that road at this point, or at that point. That was about 3 or 4 weeks ago. I think we'll be monitoring events on a regular basis, and depending on how things moving forward, we'll make those decisions based on the information that we have at the time. but I'm not sure we're there yet. Our staffing levels are actually quite good. They're extraordinarily good. We don't have any need right now to pull that lever with respect to having an issue with meeting the 42 minimums. So Steve or Chief, if you want to jump in.
Yeah, I'll just add on to Jeff. In our up until this week daily conversations with the OPA, we have done our very best not to do an overreach on management rights or to directly impact the collective agreement. It's been a live discussion, not just between us and the SOA, but it's been a live discussion between the Ontario Association of Chiefs of Police, the Solicitor General, and the PAO. It's on the table, but it hasn't been executed in any significant way that I'm aware of across the province, and certainly not at all here. As I mentioned, we can't say we're out of the thick of the response, but it feels like we're getting closer to the end. And so the likelihood of us having to exert or even negotiate some sort of a significant impact on the current agreement, particularly in that particular issue, Mayor, that you raise, is declining significantly and is likely going to not be an option, a needed option going forward. To our earlier point, though, as Jeff pointed out in the core of his presentation, the opportunity for us to revisit the entire collective agreement, particularly around scheduling and particularly around staffing levels, is a very real opportunity that could have a significant impact on our operating costs. And I'll ask Steve to comment specifically on that item, as well as any other thoughts he has on the question you just asked.
Yeah, Chief, I think you covered it. You and Jeff covered it very well. We've been tracking very closely our staffing numbers. Staff are coming out. Our turnout rate right now is very, very good. Our sick leave is down, so we haven't approached at any time anywhere getting close to the 42 minimum. So we haven't needed to breach it, and we haven't actually had to explain that we had extenuating circumstances or exigent circumstances, and that's why we breached it. When it comes to opportunities moving ahead, as we start to move into the opportunity to bargain with the OPA, we know that or believe that there may be appetite to actually look at our shift schedule and have discussions about how we can look to mutually make it better moving ahead.
Could I ask a question about overtime? What are we looking at? Is it down because the staffing is so good right now?
Yes. Initially, we did see a spike. We started tracking overtime. Well, we track overtime on an ongoing basis, but we've broken this year into two different periods, and we used March 13th as the demarcation point. We did see a spike for a few weeks after March 13th. There was a significant increase in overtime related to the incident command team and the pandemic response. However, we quickly put in place enhanced reporting, enhanced controls. We really cut back down on the regular operational overtime. We've taken a very strict approach with respect to any pandemic overtime as well, because over the first couple of weeks, we were working some members were working some really long hours. But calls for service are down, staffing levels are good. We did have some initial issues with the comm center, which is a notorious, consistent high user of overtime, and under the leadership of Acting Deputy Chief Joan McKenna, they put in place a change to the staffing there, and overtime has come down over the last 3 weeks to essentially zero in the comm center. So some tremendous work there. But we have seen, aside from the initial blip, we have seen overtime come down significantly, and that's been built into our forecast. Our forecast does assume an increase for pandemic overtime, but overall, we are forecasting a decrease in total overtime through the end of the year, and we are seeing that in our actual results.
So that'll be some savings. Okay.
Yeah, that is included in the forecast.
Good. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. When do you foresee the next sort of major update to us on this? Because obviously this is a fast-moving or relatively fast-moving event, and I'm just wondering, are you seeing that you'll have sort of a better idea of where we're heading in a couple of weeks, or what's your sense of this in terms of timing?
I would suggest for now continuing to moving forward monthly updates at the FAC unless there's an urgent need and something major has changed. That would be my recommendation.
Okay, so we could look to you for some indication that you have news that you'd like to call a special meeting or accelerate the meeting.
Yes.
Which sounds good. Mayor, did you have any other questions?
No, thank you.
Carol Ann, I think, did you have any questions?
No, I'm good, thank you.
Member Meehan, sorry, Member Nerman, did you have any questions?
No, thank you.
Okay. Okay, well, I guess that should be the end of the presentation. So is this presentation received?
Received.
Received.
Is there any other business?
No.
I don't hear any. The communications we dealt with, and I'm not sure if anybody wanted to do any follow-ups on that. The communication from the Executive Director of Volunteer Ottawa.
Well, the thing is, she knows what our position is on the fee, because she was at the, she was part of the consultations. I don't see how she thinks that maybe we can waive that right now, with all things considered. So I don't know how you all feel about it, but I think this request should be just turned down for obvious reasons.
Yeah, I think I would agree with you. I don't think we have the opportunity now to dig a deeper hole. We're not deep enough.
We don't, no, absolutely not.
Okay, if there's no other comments, then I would move for adjournment. And the next meeting is to be determined.
Okay, thank you all.
Great. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks very much.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Good job, Krista. Thank you.
Thanks, Krista.
Thank you.
Thanks all. Bye-bye.